Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and fall asleep. If today was long or heavy, I'll do my best to make your night a little more comfortable with these stories. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy calm, quiet horror stories like these, you're welcome to subscribe. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I came home from work one afternoon with a very simple plan. I just needed to grab my spare tires and then head straight to a garage to get them installed. It wasn't meant to be a long stop. I wasn't settling in for the evening. I wasn't planning to relax or hang around the house. It was purely practical, something I wanted to get done and out of the way. At that time, my family situation was very straightforward. My sister was away at school, roughly 7 hours from home. My parents weren't going to be back until much later. I knew for a fact that neither of them would be home for at least another 5 hours. The house was supposed to be empty. Completely empty. I pulled into the driveway, unlocked the door, and went inside. Everything felt normal. Quiet. The kind of quiet you expect when you're alone in a familiar house. No lights on, no sounds, no sense that anyone else had been there recently. I moved quickly. I changed my clothes, grabbed the spare tires, I'd loaded them into my car, and left. The entire stop couldn't have taken more than a few minutes. I locked the door behind me and drove straight to the garage. The tire installation took about 2 hours. Nothing unusual happened there. I waited, scrolled on my phone, paid, and drove back home. By the time I returned, it was still hours before anyone else was supposed to arrive. The house should have been exactly the same as I'd left it. When I walked in through the front door, I stepped into the living room and immediately noticed something that didn't belong. There was a chair sitting in the middle of the hallway, not pushed against a wall, not tucked into a corner. It was placed directly in the center of the hallway, facing the front door, like it had been positioned intentionally, almost like someone had set it there to be seen. At first, I didn't react strongly. My brain tried to process it logically. I noticed it, registered that it was there, and kept walking. It didn't immediately trigger fear. It was just confusing. Then I realized something else. I didn't recognize the chair. It wasn't one of ours. It was a plain metal folding chair, the kind you'd buy for a few dollars at a retail store. Lightweight, simple, functional. The kind of chair people use at events or keep in garages for extra seating. But we didn't own anything like that. I stood there for a moment, looking at it, trying to remember if maybe we had one tucked away somewhere, or maybe from an old gathering, maybe something I had forgotten about. But the more I looked at it, the more certain I became that it didn't belong in our house. Still, I didn't panic. My first assumption was that my parents must have picked it up for some reason. Maybe they borrowed it. Maybe they bought it and hadn't mentioned it yet. Maybe it had been left temporarily and forgotten about. I picked it up. It felt real, solid, cold metal in my hands. There was nothing strange about its weight or texture. I folded it up like any normal folding chair and carried it out to the garage. I propped it up against my dad's workbench, planning to ask about it later when someone got home. Then I went about my evening. A couple of hours later, my mom arrived home. We crossed paths casually, and in passing, I asked her why she had left a metal folding chair in the middle of the hallway. She looked at me, confused. She told me we don't own any metal folding chairs. At first, I thought she was joking or just misremembering. I told her that when I came back from the garage, there was a metal chair sitting right in the middle of the hallway facing the front door. She immediately told me that couldn't be possible. She said she hadn't been home all day and had only just arrived about an hour ago. She also said my dad hadn't been home either, and my sister was still away at school. According to her, but no one had been in the house. I felt my stomach drop. I insisted that the chair was real. I told her I had physically picked it up, folded it, and placed it in the garage. I could still picture exactly where I had leaned it against the workbench. She asked me to show her. We walked out to the garage together. The chair was gone. Not moved. Not knocked over. Gone. I searched the garage immediately. I checked behind the workbench. I looked around the walls. I checked the corners. I checked the driveway. I checked the backyard. I even checked inside the house again, walking through every room slowly. There was no metal folding chair anywhere. It had vanished. I could feel panic starting to creep in, mixed with disbelief. I kept telling her that I wasn't joking, that I wasn't messing around, that I wasn't on drugs, that I wasn't imagining things. I explained the entire sequence again, coming home, leaving, coming back, seeing the chair, picking it up, folding it, and placing it in the garage. She listened, but I could tell she didn't fully know what to make of it. She said it was strange, but she didn't dwell on it. To her, it was an odd story with no clear explanation. Something to shrug off. But I couldn't shrug it off. That chair had been real. I had touched it, lifted it, folded it, carried it, set it down. There was no moment where it felt dreamlike or uncertain. It wasn't a glimpse from the corner of my eye. It wasn't something I saw briefly and questioned later. It had been there long enough for me to interact with it in a completely normal way. And then it was gone. I never saw that chair again. Not in the house, not in the garage, not anywhere else. No one ever claimed ownership of it. No explanation ever surfaced. It didn't turn up later in some corner or storage space. It simply ceased to exist. What unsettles me most isn't just that the chair appeared and disappeared. It's the way it was placed. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't random clutter. It was positioned directly in the center of the hallway, facing the front door, as if it had been deliberately set there to be noticed, as if someone wanted whoever walked in to see it immediately. I've tried to explain it logically over the years. Maybe I misremembered. Maybe I mixed up events. Maybe stress or routine caused my mind to fill in gaps incorrectly. But none of those explanations sit right with me. I know what our house looked like. I knew what furniture we owned. I knew who was home and who wasn't. I knew where I placed that chair. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing else in the house was disturbed. Nothing was missing. Nothing else appeared out of place. Just that chair. And then nothing. Even now, when I think back on it, what bothers me most is how calm I was in the moment. How natural it felt to pick it up and move it, as if my mind accepted its presence without question. Only later did the strangeness fully sink in. It makes me wonder how many other things we accept without questioning. How many moments slip by that don't fully make sense until we look back on them later. That chair didn't frighten me in a dramatic way. It didn't feel threatening. It felt wrong, out of place. Like something that had crossed into my life briefly and then left without explanation, leaving behind nothing but a memory and a lingering sense that reality isn't always as stable as we like to believe. I still don't know where it came from, and I still don't know where it went. And that, more than anything, is what stays with me. It's not as dramatic or frightening as some of the stories people share, and there's nothing violent or obviously terrifying about it. Even now, years later, my partner and I still don't know what to make of it. It comes back to us every once in a while, usually during quiet moments, and we'll look at each other and say, "Do you remember that?" There has never been a clear explanation for it. Either it was an incredible coincidence, or there was some kind of connection we don't understand. For about 10 years now, my Nana has been living in a nursing home. She had a stroke, and mentally she's never fully been the same since. She still recognizes us when we visit. She smiles when she sees us, gets happy, asks how we are. But often, her words drift into something else. She'll talk as if she's in a different time, reliving memories from decades ago. Sometimes she talks in sentences that don't quite connect, jumping from one thought to another without warning. It's hard to see. It still makes me sad when I think about it. Growing up, my Nana and I were incredibly close. My parents both worked long hours, and she spent a lot of time with me. She helped raise me in many ways. She knew me better than almost anyone else. She could always tell when I was lying, even when I thought I was being clever about it. She could somehow sense when I was sick, even if she hadn't seen me that day. There was always this feeling that she understood me on a level that went beyond words. We were also eerily similar. Our personalities overlap in strange ways, and even our looks do. There are photos of her from when she was 21, and the resemblance is so strong it's unsettling. If you didn't know better, you could easily think the photo was of me. People have commented on it my entire life. Because of all that, our bond always felt deeper than just grandmother and granddaughter. She was a constant in my childhood. Someone safe. Someone who just knew things. But when I left home to study and later moved abroad, that closeness became harder to maintain. But it never disappeared. I introduced her to my partner when we first started dating in college. He's from a different country than I am, and eventually I moved to his country to be with him. She liked him immediately. Even with her speech sometimes wandering, she always seemed very clear about him. At the time all of this happened, my partner and I had been together for a few years. We were young, and fresh out of university, still figuring out who we were as adults. My visa was going to expire, and we had a decision to make. We either had to separate for an unknown amount of time, or find a way to live in the same country legally. So we decided to get married. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It felt obvious. We loved each other deeply and couldn't imagine being apart. But because of our age and circumstances, we didn't want a big wedding yet. We were broke, overwhelmed, and honestly just wanted to be together without making a big deal of it. So we decided to elope. In my husband's country, the legal side of marriage and the actual wedding ceremony are often separate things. You can get officially married at a courthouse and then have a wedding later. So that's what we planned to do. We would quietly get married for the paperwork, announce our engagement to our families, and then have a proper wedding a few years down the line. No one knew. We didn't tell my parents. We didn't tell his family. We didn't tell friends. It was our secret. Looking back now, it seems silly. No one would have judged us, especially considering we're still happily together years later. But at the time, we were young and completely wrapped up in each other. The secrecy felt exciting, romantic, like something that belonged only to us. We flew to my home country to visit my parents and announce our engagement. Everything about the trip felt normal. We were nervous in the way people get nervous when they're about to share big news, but nothing more than that. My dad picked us up from the airport. We were chatting casually in the car, talking about the flight, about plans for the visit, about nothing important. Then, almost offhandedly, my dad mentioned something strange. He told us that my Nana had been very upset when he visited her a few days earlier. That alone wasn't completely unusual. Her mood sometimes changed. But then he explained why. She had been insisting, very strongly, that she had seen something in a dream. She told my family that she had dreamed that I had eloped, that I was already married. She wasn't vague about it. She didn't speak in the confused, drifting way she often did. According to my dad, she was unusually clear, focused. She raised her voice. which she hadn't done since before her stroke. She repeated herself, insisting that it was true, that she knew it had happened. Everyone dismissed it at the time. No one had any reason to believe it. As far as they knew, my partner and I were just dating. Young, not even officially engaged yet. They assumed it was just another confused thought, another memory mixed up in her mind. But she wouldn't let it go. My dad told us he thought it was sweet. He said she seemed so worried about me, and it was touching to see her so lucid and animated, even if she was wrong. He mentioned it casually, like an odd but harmless story. Inside the car, everything went silent. My husband and I didn't look at each other at first. I felt cold all over, like someone had opened a door inside me and let all the warmth out. My heart started pounding, not in fear exactly, but in shock. The day she had her dream was the same day we decided to elope. No one knew. There was no announcement, no paperwork completed yet. But the decision had been made, firmly and privately, between the two of us. There was no way she could have known. For the rest of the drive, neither of us said much. We tried to act normal, but inside, my thoughts were racing. I kept replaying what my dad had said. The clarity, the insistence, the timing. A few days later, we went to visit my Nana. She was happy to see us, smiling, asking about our lives. When we told her we were engaged, she was thrilled, overjoyed. There was no sign that she remembered the dream at all. No mention of eloping, no strange comments, just happiness. That somehow made it even more unsettling. Now, years have passed. We are married, we had our wedding. Our families celebrated with us. Everyone believes the wedding day was the day we officially got married. No one ever found out about the elopement. No one except my Nana. Even now, we don't know what to think. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was a random dream that happened to line up with reality in a way that feels impossible. Maybe it was just chance, amplified by emotion and memory. Or maybe somehow she knew. That's what stays with me. Not fear, not belief in anything supernatural in a dramatic sense, but the quiet discomfort of knowing that someone who was slipping away from reality still managed to see something no one else could. That a woman who raised me, who always seemed to understand me without needing words, sensed something important at the exact moment it happened. Sometimes I wonder if that connection never really faded. And sometimes, I wonder if there are things we decide deep inside ourselves that ripple outward, touching people who know us best, even when they're far away, and even when their minds are no longer fully anchored in the present. It still doesn't scare me, but it still makes me pause. And years later, we still talk about it, quietly, when the world feels a little too strange to fully explain. I have quite a few strange stories from my childhood, but the one that always stands out the most didn't actually happen directly to me. It happened to my mom. I was too young at the time to fully understand how disturbing it was. But as I got older and heard the details again and again, it became clear just how much it had shaken her. When I was little, my family lived in a house that, even now, I can still picture clearly. It was very old. The kind of old that you don't need to be told about, because you can feel it the moment you walk inside. The floors creaked no matter how lightly you stepped. The walls never felt quite straight. Doors would sometimes stick for no reason, and the air inside always felt a little heavier than it should have. At the time, I didn't question it. Old houses were just old houses. But looking back, there was something about that place that always felt off. Not dangerous, not dramatic, just uncomfortable in a quiet way. My little brother was still very young then. His bedroom was at the end of the hallway. slightly more isolated than the rest of the rooms. It was full of toys, the kind of toys that made noise, played music, lit up, and spoke in cheerful recorded voices. Plastic animals, toy cars, little learning toys that said words or sang songs when you pressed a button. Most of those toys ran on batteries. Some of them were fairly new. Some were older, half broken, the kind kids lose interest in, but parents keep around anyway. One weekday afternoon, my mom was home alone. My brother and I were both at school. My dad was at work. The house was completely empty except for her. She decided to clean my brother's room. This wasn't unusual. She cleaned regularly, especially when the house was quiet. According to her, the house was completely silent at that time. No TV on, no radio. Just the normal background noises of an old house settling. She was in my brother's room, picking up toys, wiping surfaces, and straightening things out. Everything was normal, calm, ordinary. Then, without any warning, every single electronic toy in the room turned on at once. Not one or two, all of them. Music started playing, voices started talking, lights began flashing, animal sounds, songs, electronic noises overlapping and clashing together. The room went from silent to chaos in a single second. My mom said it was so sudden and so loud that she froze in place. Before she could even react, she realized something even worse. 2 of the toys did not have batteries in them. She knew this for a fact. She had removed the batteries herself because those particular toys used to turn on randomly, and she was tired of it. They had been sitting dead for weeks, and yet they were playing. She described the feeling as pure panic. Not fear in a movie sense, but a deep, instinctive dread, or the kind that makes your stomach drop and your skin go cold. She didn't scream. She didn't try to shut the toys off. She didn't even move at first. She just stood there, surrounded by noise, realizing that something was very wrong. When she finally snapped out of it, she ran out of the room. She didn't turn anything off. She didn't go back to check. She just left the room exactly as it was and went into the living room, trying to calm herself down. When we came home from school later that day, she didn't tell us what had happened right away, but she was clearly shaken. She was quieter than usual, watching my brother closely, like she didn't want him out of her sight. That night, she told us we were all going to camp out in the living room. She tried to make it sound fun. Blankets on the floor, pillows, sleeping bags, like an indoor camping trip. But even as a kid, I could tell something wasn't right. My mom was tense. She kept looking down the hallway toward my brother's room. She didn't want him sleeping alone in there. We slept in the living room that night, and the next night, and the night after that. 3 nights in total. She said she just wanted to spend time together, but years later she admitted the truth. She was terrified. She didn't want my brother alone in that room. She didn't trust the house anymore, not completely. After that incident, things never fully went back to normal. We didn't have toys all turn on at once again, but strange things kept happening. Occasionally, one toy would activate on its own. Sometimes 2. A toy would start playing music in the middle of the night. A voice would suddenly say a phrase when no one was near it. Lights would flash briefly and then stop. My mom would check the batteries every time. Sometimes the batteries were almost dead. Sometimes there were no batteries at all. It didn't happen every day. It didn't even happen every week. That was almost worse. It was unpredictable and random, just enough to keep everyone uneasy. My brother never seemed afraid. He was too young to really understand. Sometimes he laughed when a toy went off. Sometimes he ignored it. But my mom watched everything closely. She stopped letting him play alone in his room for long periods. She always shut the door at night. Eventually, we moved. I don't remember the move feeling dramatic at the time. It was just another change, another house. But my mom was relieved. You could see it in the way she breathed easier in the new place. The tension she carried in that old house slowly faded, and the toy incidents stopped completely. Years later, when we were older, she finally told us how badly that first incident had scared her. How helpless she had felt standing in that room with all the toys going off at once. How unnatural it felt. How she still couldn't explain it, even now. She's not someone who jumps to supernatural conclusions. She's practical, grounded, or logical. Even today, she tries to find rational explanations. Faulty wiring, static electricity, some strange electrical interference, but no explanation ever fully fits, especially not the toys without batteries. What stays with me isn't just the event itself, it's the reaction. The way my mom, who was always strong and calm, felt the need to keep us all together for days afterward. The way she listened more carefully to the house. The way she never laughed it off. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. It was just wrong. And sometimes, those are the experiences that linger the longest. The ones that don't come with clear answers, only memories and a quiet understanding that something happened that shouldn't have. Even now, when I see old electronic toys in thrift stores or hear one go off unexpectedly, my stomach tightens just a little. Because I remember that house. And I remember the sound of everything turning on at once. I tell this story a lot, and almost no one ever believes me. I can see it on people's faces when I finish telling it. The polite nod, the half smile, the look that says they think I was tired, confused, or imagining things. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And even now, years later, it still unsettles me in a way that hasn't faded with time. When I was 14, I spent a summer staying at my grandparents' house. It was something I had done before, and something I always looked forward to. Their house felt safe and familiar, the kind of place where routines never really changed. Same furniture, same smells, same quiet evenings. Nothing about it ever felt threatening or strange. The house itself wasn't especially big, but it felt solid, comfortable. It had that lived-in warmth that only comes from decades of the same family occupying the same space. The kitchen was the heart of the house. That's where everyone gathered. But that's where my grandparents spent most of their evenings, sitting at the table, talking quietly, watching the clock drift toward bedtime. That summer night started out completely normal. It was around 11 in the evening. Late enough that the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, but not so late that it felt unusual to be awake. My grandparents usually went to bed around that time, sometimes earlier, sometimes a little later, depending on the day. I was in my room, lying on the bed, or not really sleeping. I remember feeling thirsty, that dry, nagging kind of thirst that won't let you ignore it. After a few minutes of trying to convince myself it wasn't worth getting up, I finally decided to go to the kitchen and get a glass of water. I stepped out into the hallway. The house was dim, lit only by a few small lamps that my grandparents always left on at night. The light was soft and yellow, casting long shadows along the walls. Everything felt quiet and calm. As I walked toward the kitchen, I could see into it from the hallway. Someone was sitting at the table. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It looked completely normal. The person was sitting in my granddad's usual spot at the kitchen table. The posture was familiar. The way they were leaning slightly forward, elbows close to the table, hands near their face. It was my granddad. That's what my brain told me instantly, without question. The figure looked exactly like him. Same build. Oh, same hair. Same outline. He was sitting there calmly, eating a sandwich. I could see the motion of his hand lifting food to his mouth. I could see the shape of the bread. There was nothing strange about it. I said hello. Not loudly. Just a casual greeting, the way you do when you pass someone in the middle of the night. He didn't respond, but that didn't strike me as odd either. My granddad wasn't always chatty late at night, and sometimes he was lost in his own thoughts. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water. I remember the sound of the tap, the way it echoed slightly in the quiet house. I remember taking a sip, still half asleep, barely paying attention to anything else. The whole time, the person at the table stayed there, still eating, still silent. I didn't look at him directly for long. I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel uneasy. It felt like one of those ordinary moments you don't think twice about, or the kind you forget almost immediately. With my glass of water in hand, I turned and headed back toward my room. I was only a few steps away from the kitchen when I heard a voice behind me. It was my grandfather. He had just come out of his bedroom. He asked me who I was talking to. The question didn't make sense at first. I remember stopping mid-step, confused. I turned around instinctively, ready to point back toward the kitchen. The chair at the table was empty. There was no one there, but the sandwich was gone. The kitchen was exactly how it always looked when no one was in it. Quiet, still, lifeless. My heart dropped so hard it felt like it knocked the air out of me. I stood there, staring, trying to understand what I was seeing. My grandfather looked at me, clearly confused by my reaction. He asked again who I had been talking to. I told him I thought it was him. He looked genuinely unsettled by that. He told me he had been in his room the entire time. He hadn't come out. He hadn't been in the kitchen. He hadn't been eating anything. I looked back at the table again, half expecting the figure to reappear, like my eyes had just skipped over it somehow. Nothing. No plate, no crumbs, no sign that anyone had been sitting there at all. The fear didn't hit me all at once. It came in waves, first confusion, then disbelief. Then a slow, creeping dread as my mind replayed the scene over and over again. I knew what I had seen. I hadn't glimpsed something from the corner of my eye. I hadn't mistaken a shadow or a reflection. I had walked into the kitchen. I had spoken. I had stood just feet away from someone who looked exactly like my grandfather, sitting in his chair, eating a sandwich. It hadn't felt dreamlike. It hadn't felt wrong at the time. That's what makes it so disturbing. My grandfather didn't joke about it. He didn't laugh it off. He told me calmly that I must have been tired. That sometimes your eyes play tricks on you at night. He was trying to reassure me, but I could tell he was shaken too. I went back to my room after that, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail. The posture, the movement, the shape of the sandwich, the silence, the normality of it all. I kept asking myself how my mind could create something so detailed, so convincing, in such a short amount of time. The next morning, I checked the kitchen. There was no sandwich missing, no sign that my grandfather had eaten anything late that night. Everything lined up with what he had told me. Over the years, I've told this story many times. Friends, partners, sometimes family. Most people don't believe me. They assume it was exhaustion, or a half-dream, or my brain filling in gaps in the dark. I understand why they think that. But I also know the difference between imagining something and experiencing it. But what still bothers me isn't fear of ghosts or anything supernatural. It's the way the moment felt completely ordinary until it wasn't. The way my brain accepted the presence without question. The way reality shifted in a single sentence spoken by my grandfather. "Who were you talking to?" That's the sentence that broke everything. Even now, when I think about that night, I don't feel panic. I feel unease. A quiet, a lingering discomfort that something slipped into my reality for a brief moment and then disappeared without explanation. I don't know what I saw. I don't know why it looked exactly like my grandfather. And I don't know why it was sitting there, eating a sandwich, like it belonged. But I know this. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dreaming. And I wasn't mistaken. Because some things once seen never really leave you. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. This happened around 15 years ago now, but it's one of those memories that never really fades. Even after all this time, it still comes up in conversation sometimes, usually late at night, when old stories start resurfacing. And every time I tell it, I can feel that same uneasy feeling settle back into my chest, like something unfinished. When I was in high school, my group of friends spent a huge amount of time at one particular friend's house, mostly because it was massive. Compared to everyone else's homes, it felt enormous. Multiple floors, wide hallways, big rooms where sound echoed just a little longer than it should. It was also an old house, not ancient, but old enough that you could feel its age in the walls and floors. The best part was that his parents were incredibly relaxed about us being there. They didn't mind when 10 of us showed up at once. They didn't complain when we cooked dinner for everyone, stayed up late blasting music, or spent hours playing video games. As long as we were respectful, they more or less let us take over the place whenever we were there. So naturally, that house became our main hangout. We spent countless evenings there, especially on weekends. It was familiar, comfortable, a second home in many ways. Nothing about it ever felt threatening. If anything, it felt safe because it was always full of people, noise, laughter. One evening, we were all sitting in my friend's bedroom. There were quite a few of us, spread around the room on chairs, the bed, and the floor. The TV was on, playing something we weren't really paying attention to. It was dark outside, but the lights in the room were on. The curtains were open, mostly because no one ever bothered to close them. The window reflected the room clearly. At one point, 2 people on opposite sides of the room suddenly jumped at the same time. Not laughed, not reacted casually. They physically jolted, looked like they'd been startled by something unexpected. Both of them immediately started looking around the room, confused and a little shaken. We all asked what was wrong. They explained that they had both seen someone walk across the room. Not directly, in the reflection in the window. That detail mattered. The window was on the 2nd floor, which meant whatever they saw couldn't have been someone walking past outside. The reflection showed the inside of the room only. According to them, and in that reflection, they saw the clear shape of a person walking across the space behind us. But none of us had moved. Everyone accounted for was still sitting exactly where they'd been moments earlier. At first, we tried to laugh it off. Someone suggested it was just a trick of the light, or maybe their eyes playing games because they were tired. But the fact that 2 people, on opposite sides of the room, saw the same thing at the same time made it harder to dismiss completely. A few of the girls got genuinely freaked out. We had to calm them down, reassure them that nothing was wrong, that old houses make reflections weird, that it was probably nothing. Eventually, the mood settled, and the night carried on. But the idea stuck with us. A couple of weeks later, we were back at the same house. Someone found a pack of cards in one of the drawers, But these weren't normal playing cards. They had letters on them instead of numbers and suits. Someone joked that we could use them like a Ouija board and see if the house was actually haunted. At first, it was clearly meant as a joke, but the more we talked about it, the more curious we became. Eventually, curiosity won. We found a large wooden board to use as a base. I think it might have been part of an old table at some point. We laid it flat on the floor, arranged the letter cards in a circle around the edge, and made 2 crude yes and no cards to add to it. For the planchette, we used a glass. Looking back now, it feels ridiculous. A bunch of teenagers messing around, half laughing, half nervous. None of us took it seriously enough to think it could actually do anything. We placed our fingers lightly on the glass and started asking questions. At first, nothing happened. We joked about it, accused each other of pushing, told everyone to relax their hands. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the glass began to move. It slid across the board, stopping at letters. And the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. People went quiet. Jokes stopped. You could feel everyone leaning in, watching closely, trying to figure out if someone was messing around. The answers spelled out that it was a man, someone who used to live in the house, someone who had died there. We asked when he died. The answer came back as long. That alone sent a chill through the room. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was vague in a way that felt intentional. We asked if he was the one moving the glass. Yes. At that point, a few people wanted to stop. Others wanted to keep going. Fear and excitement mixed together in that way that only happens when you're young and doing something you know you probably shouldn't. Then I did something stupid. I asked if he could move anything else besides the glass. The answer was immediate. Yes. We all froze, listening. We expected something obvious, a noise, a knock, a door creaking, something falling, but nothing happened. The house stayed quiet. Too quiet. We asked if he had moved something. Yes. Nothing seemed different, so eventually we shrugged it off and continued asking questions, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping in. After a while, someone remembered that you're supposed to properly say goodbye when using a Ouija board. So we did. We thanked whatever we were speaking to and closed the session. It was around 10:30 at night. Not long after, everyone started heading home, when we were a little spooked, but mostly treating it like a creepy story we'd laugh about later. I walked home with another friend who lived nearby. We talked about how weird it was, joking nervously, trying to convince ourselves it was all nonsense. When I got home, I walked through the front door, and my mom immediately called out to me from another room. She told me to be careful in my bedroom because a mirror had fallen off the wall earlier, and they weren't sure if all the broken glass had been cleaned up yet. That caught my attention. I asked when it had happened. She said, casually, "Oh, about 10:30. The same time. The exact same time I had asked if the spirit could move something. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there, letting the connection sink in. The rational part of my brain screamed coincidence. A big one? Sure, but still a coincidence. Mirrors fall. Accidents happen. But another part of me couldn't ignore the timing. To this day, I don't know what to believe. Maybe someone pushed the glass. Maybe it was subconscious movement. Maybe the mirror falling was completely unrelated. But every time I think about it, the memory lines up too cleanly to ignore. It's not the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, but it's one of the few things I genuinely can't explain. And sometimes, that's worse. My father passed away almost 11 years ago now. Saying that out loud still feels strange, like the number doesn't quite belong to my memories. 11 years sounds like a long time, but in my mind, it sometimes feels like yesterday. Other times, it feels like another lifetime entirely. Grief doesn't follow a straight line. It bends, it loops back on itself. And sometimes it shows up in ways you don't expect. Since he died, I've seen him 3 times. I don't say that lightly. I don't say it for shock or attention. I say it because it's true, at least as true as anything I've experienced. These weren't dreams. They didn't feel like imagination. They weren't moments of half-sleep or wishful thinking. They happened while I was awake, aware, and going about my normal life. The first time happened when I was still in middle school. It was for a family tree project. One of those assignments teachers give without realizing how complicated family histories can be. I was sitting at the table with my mother, papers spread out in front of me, asking questions about relatives I barely knew. Names, dates, where people came from, who married who. It was simple, factual work, but it naturally drifted toward my father's side of the family. That alone was emotional. Talking about him was still hard then. The loss was fresh enough that it sat close to the surface, even during ordinary conversations. I remember asking my mom a question about one of his relatives. I don't even remember which one now. As she was answering, I shifted slightly in my chair, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I looked up without really thinking. He walked out of the room he died in. That detail matters to me. He didn't just appear anywhere. He came from that room. The room where everything ended. The room that had changed the house forever. He walked out of it calmly, like he used to, and headed toward his favorite spot on the couch. It wasn't dramatic, or there was no sudden cold, no sound, no glowing light. He didn't look different. He looked exactly like himself. Solid. Real. Familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. I didn't scream. I didn't jump. For a split second, my brain accepted it as normal, the same way it would have before he died. Then reality caught up with me all at once. I turned my head fully. He was gone. My heart started racing, and my hands felt shaky. I didn't say anything to my mom right away. I just sat there, but trying to understand what had just happened. Part of me wanted to ask her if she'd seen anything, but I already knew the answer. She hadn't. I told myself it must have been my mind filling in gaps. Grief does strange things, especially to kids. I convinced myself it was imagination, a memory bleeding into the present because I'd been talking about him. That explanation felt thin, but it was all I had. The second time happened a year or 2 later. By then, I was older, more aware of my emotions, but still very much carrying the weight of his absence. That day had been awful. One of the worst days I can remember from that period of my life. Everything had gone wrong in small, accumulating ways. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to leave me exhausted and emotionally raw. I remember walking down the hallway toward the bathroom, head down, barely paying attention to anything around me. The house felt quiet, heavy in that familiar way it always did without him. As I passed the dining area, I glanced sideways. He was sitting at the table. It was his old spot, the one he always sat in. He was reading a newspaper just like he used to. The posture, the way he held it, the stillness. It was such an ordinary image that it felt almost cruel. This time my reaction was stronger. I stopped walking immediately. My heart started pounding, not with fear, but with shock. I felt like the world had tilted slightly, like something fundamental had gone wrong. I stared, or trying to take in every detail, trying to understand how this could be happening again. Then he was gone, Just like before, there was no transition, no fading. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. The chair was empty, the table bare. I leaned against the wall, feeling dizzy. I remember thinking that if this was my mind playing tricks on me, it was doing a terrifyingly good job. The image had been too clear, too specific, too grounded in routine. Again, I didn't tell anyone. I told myself I was stressed, that my brain was pulling up comforting images during a bad day, that it meant nothing more than unresolved grief. That explanation felt a little weaker this time. The third time was the most clear. It happened my senior year of high school. By then, life was full of decisions, college applications, future plans, the slow, painful process of moving toward adulthood without the parent who should have been there to guide me through it. My mom and I were sitting at the same table where I'd seen him before, talking seriously about my options, my hopes, my fears. The conversation felt heavy, but important. At one point, I mentioned that I was applying to the rival school of my father's alma mater. It was half a joke, half defiance, half nervousness. I wondered what he would have said about it. I wondered if he would have teased me, or pretended to be offended, or secretly been proud anyway. Almost immediately after I said it, I felt that same awareness I'd felt before. I looked up. He walked out of the room he died in. Again. The same path. The same calm movement. He crossed the space, went to the counter, picked up a coffee cup, and walked toward his bedroom. It was so mundane, so normal. It looked like a moment from any ordinary morning that used to exist before everything changed. This time I saw him clearly, not out of the corner of my eye, not as a fleeting shape. I saw him. I remember my breath catching in my throat. My eyes burned, and I had to fight the urge to cry. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't want to break the moment, even though I knew it wouldn't last. And then it ended. He was gone. The room was empty again. The house returned to its familiar stillness. My mom kept talking, completely unaware that anything unusual had happened. I don't even remember what she said next. My mind was somewhere else entirely. I never told her. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to worry her. Maybe I didn't want to hear a rational explanation that would flatten something that felt deeply personal. Or maybe I just wanted to keep it for myself. I've spent years trying to understand those moments. I've questioned my memory. I've questioned my mental state at the time. I've wondered if grief can be so powerful that it projects full, detailed images into your waking world. But I always come back to the same thing. Each time, what he appeared during moments of emotional weight, moments of transition, moments when I was thinking about family, the future, or feeling overwhelmed. He didn't speak. He didn't interact. He didn't linger. He just existed. Briefly, like a check-in. I don't know what I believe about the afterlife. I don't claim certainty about ghosts or spirits or anything supernatural. But I also can't dismiss my own experiences just because they don't fit neatly into logic. Maybe it was my mind coping. Maybe it was memory overlapping with reality. Or maybe, just maybe, he really did stop by. Just to see how we were doing. Just to remind us that he hadn't completely disappeared. I like to think it was that last one. Not because it scares me, but because it comforts me. Because sometimes the idea that the people we love never fully leave feels less frightening than the idea that they're gone forever. And if they do check in every now and then, quietly, without drama, or without fear, then I hope he knows we're okay. And I hope he knows we still think of him. All the time. This story didn't happen to me directly. It happened to my parents long before I was born. But I've heard it told so many times, in so much detail, that it feels like a memory I carry myself. When my parents tell it, it isn't rushed. It takes hours. They remember everything. The sounds, the timing, the fear, the conversations, the looks they exchanged when words stopped making sense. It's one of those stories that never gets smaller with time. If anything, it feels heavier every year. So this all took place back in the 1980s. My parents had just gotten married. They were fresh out of college, my dad finishing medical school, my mom adjusting to life with a newborn. My older brother had just been born, and they were trying to build a life from the ground up. Money was tight. They were young, tired, and hopeful in that specific way new families are. They were looking for a house near Milwaukee, somewhere safe, somewhere they could raise a family. Eventually, they found a small house in Mequon, a very wealthy area north of the city. The neighborhood was full of large homes, well-kept lawns, and families who had clearly been established for years. Compared to everything around it, this house stood out because it was small, not run down, but modest. And strangely, it was within my parents' budget. That alone should have raised questions. They put in an offer that was actually below the asking price, assuming it would be rejected. Two other couples offered more than the asking price, starting a bidding war. There was no logical reason for my parents to get the house. But the old man who owned it rejected the higher offers. He chose my parents. When asked why, he said that he and his late wife would have both agreed that giving the house to a young family was the right thing to do. He said it with certainty, like it wasn't even a decision he had struggled with. My parents were stunned, grateful, and honestly relieved beyond words. They moved in and felt incredibly lucky. The neighborhood was full of kids. My brother always had someone to play with. The house, though small, felt cozy and safe. My mom stayed home with my brother while my dad worked long hours getting his practice started. He was barely home most days, sometimes only really present on Sundays. For a while, life was very good. And then things started happening. It began in the basement. My mom did laundry down there regularly. It wasn't a finished basement, but it wasn't creepy either. Concrete walls, old utilities, the kind of space you don't think much about. One afternoon, while carrying a basket of laundry upstairs, she noticed something strange. At the bottom of the stairs, a red light was on. Not a dim light, not a soft glow. A bright, harsh red light, the kind that immediately grabs your attention. She described it as something like an emergency fallout shelter light, as encased in metal with a protective cage around it. The strange thing was, the switch for that light had been removed years ago. She knew that. My dad knew that. It wasn't functional, or at least it wasn't supposed to be. Confused, she started walking back down the stairs to investigate. The light turned off. She paused, unsure what to think. She told herself it had to be some kind of electrical surge or fluke. Old houses do weird things. She shrugged it off and went about her day. The next day, she did laundry again. As she came up the stairs, the red light turned on. Again, she turned around to go back down. Again, it shut off. This time, she didn't dismiss it. She waited at the bottom of the stairs for a moment, heart pounding, listening. Nothing happened. Then she walked back upstairs. The light turned on immediately. She turned and ran down the stairs, determined to catch it in the act. And that's when it changed. The red light began flashing violently, like a strobe, or before she could even reach the bottom. She didn't investigate further. She grabbed my brother, left the house immediately, and didn't return for the rest of the day. She sat somewhere else, shaking, trying to calm herself, replaying the moment over and over. The light never turned on again after that day. Not once. Not for my dad. Not ever. But the house wasn't finished with them. There had been knocking before the red light incident, but after that, it escalated. At first, the knocking was easy to explain away. Old house noises, pipes, wood settling, random, infrequent sounds that could be ignored. But over time, it became deliberate. One night, my parents were in bed, talking quietly about bills, schedules, normal things. Then they heard knocking. It started beneath their bed. A solid, unmistakable knock. Then it moved to the walls. Then the ceiling. The knocks came about 30 seconds apart. Regular. Intentional. Or they got out of bed and started following the sound, trying to find the source. Every time they thought they had pinpointed it, it jumped somewhere else in the room. Eventually, the knocking moved outside the bedroom. They followed it through the house until it led them to the foyer closet. By now, my mom was holding a fireplace poker. My dad had grabbed a baseball bat. The knocking was loud, rapid, relentless. As my dad reached for the closet doors, a voice spoke. "Just knock, knock." He swung the doors open. There was nothing inside, and all the knocking stopped instantly. They stood there in silence, staring at each other, knowing that something had just crossed a line. Neither of them slept that night. After that, my mom was barely holding it together. She was alone in the house all day with my brother. She was afraid to go into certain rooms, afraid to go into the basement, afraid to be alone at night. My dad, logical and skeptical, no longer tried to rationalize it away. He knew something was wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. Sometime in the early morning hours, my parents were jolted awake by a massive thud. Immediately, they heard my brother crying. They ran to his room. He wasn't in his bed. He was lying in the exact center of the room, on the floor. His blanket was perfectly draped over him, pulled tight, as if he had been tucked in. He was at least 5 feet away from the bed. They picked him up, or terrified, asking what had happened. He pointed to the closet and said very clearly, "It pushed me. The fox pushed me." My dad tore the closet apart, expecting maybe an animal. There was nothing. Then it hit them. The last name of the man who sold them the house was Fox. That broke something in them. My mom refused to stay there anymore, especially since she was now pregnant with my sister. My dad decided he was done ignoring it. One night, he sat alone in the living room and spoke out loud. He said he didn't know if the spirit was real. He didn't know if it was Mrs. Fox, but he told it to stop. He said they were a loving family, that the old man who sold them the house would be ashamed if this was his wife, that they deserved peace, that his wife was pregnant, that his son had been hurt. He said it would stop, or he would make it stop. After that, nothing happened again. No lights, no knocking, no voices. But there was one final thing. A few days after they moved into the house, my mom had bought a wooden cabinet at a neighborhood garage sale. Months later, after moving it, they found an anniversary card inside. It said, "Happy anniversary ___ and ___ Fox." It was found 2 days after my parents' anniversary. They never saw the old man again. Years later, during renovations, my dad tore up the flooring in my brother's room. Right where my brother had been lying that night, there was a blood stain. Mrs. Fox had died in that room. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.